Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ballot Boxing, the mayoral forum. We are broadcasting live from the Moody Auditorium at the Belo Center for New Media, the University of Texas at Austin. I'm Nathan Bernier with KUT News. I'll be one of your moderators this evening. The other moderators are Shannon Wolfson of KXAN and Michael Kanan of the Austin Monitor. Now, this is the last of 11 candidate discussion forums hosted by KUT, the Austin Monitor, the Austin Chronicle, KXAN, and Univision. We've done all the city council districts already. You can listen back to those forums at KUT.org. This evening will work like this. After this introduction, candidates will have 1 minute to make initial remarks, and then the moderators will pose a series of questions on a wide range of topics. We will also solicit audience questions via Twitter, and you can submit your questions using the hashtag BBMayor. All candidates will answer every question. There will be no questions directed to specific candidates, and responses will be limited to 1 minute each. We have a countdown clock over here that will allow candidates to see how much time they have left, and this forum is scheduled to last about 90 minutes. Now, to our candidates, we have invited all of the candidates for Austin Mayor who have active campaigns, at least a website and a campaign manager, and that means we have 6 of the 8 people running for Austin Mayor tonight. If you could just give them all a round of applause, and I'll introduce them individually. So our candidates are, from the left, Todd Phelps, Mike Martinez, Randall Stevens, Cheryl Cole, David Orshalik, and Stephen Adler. Thank you all for participating in our forum tonight and giving Austin voters a chance to learn more about what you all are about. So we'll begin with these opening statements. Mr. Phelps, you're up first.
Hi, how are y'all doing? I just wanted to thank everybody for participating and for their various forms of service in the past. I grew up in Austin, and I had not thought about running for mayor before. I had a lot of friends that came up to me and said, you know, Austin's going in the wrong direction, and we need to do something about it. And one of my friends was working for a transportation network company that was being blocked by City Hall from doing business. He urged me to participate. And I listened to my colleagues and friends and jumped in the race. And like I said, I grew up here, went to Hill Elementary, Hyde Park Baptist High School, University of Texas, and ACC. And a lot of people know me as a musician and a farmer, and I've worked in the lending industries. But what they might not know about me is I started an alternative energy company right here in the same city where my dad started his technology company 30 years ago, and my mother began teaching 30 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Your time is up. Mr. Martinez.
Thank you all. I want to thank the host for having this forum tonight. And I want to thank you all for taking time to be here. I'm Mike Martinez, and I'm running for mayor of the city of Austin. I've served as an Austin firefighter and as a council member with one rule in mind, and that is that no one gets left behind. As your mayor, I'll continue to fight to hold corporations accountable and make sure that they pay living wage and prevailing wages, and that we'll go after predatory lenders that take advantage of the middle class and overcharge consumers. We'll continue fighting for equal pay for equal work. My vision for Austin is quite simple. It's so that working class families and middle class families can partake in the prosperity that we know as Austin. We need a mayor who will be the strongest voice for the middle class and working class in Austin. It's what I've done as a firefighter. It's what I've done as a council member. It's what I'll do as a mayor. I really appreciate the time tonight and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you. Randall Stevens.
Yes, I'm Randall Stevens. I live in Avery Ranch. I'm running an interactive campaign via my web domain, austinbluedog.org. It's important to me to think that we can use our better creative elements in Austin to create a new way to campaign so we don't have to borrow money from third-party interests connected to real estate interests and to have to worry about whether or not the decisions on large ticket items for our people, our taxpayers, our rent payers, and our homeowners in Austin are made in their better interests. So I've taken on campaign finance as a goal to make change if I'm elected, to roll back bad decisions, to use common sense decisions, to stop imagining us into a corner and start inspiring smart growth along the periphery, to partner with master developers for magnet retail in Far East Austin and to make sure that the surplus we have today fixes the streets in Far East Austin.
Mr. Stevens, your time is up. Thank you. Ms. Cole.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Cole. I want to thank KUT and all the other sponsors for having this event tonight and for all of you for coming out. When I first went on council, I had a friend and a mentor. Her name was Betty Dunkerley. She was a former chairperson of the Audit and Finance Committee and also a longtime city finance director. She showed me the way to the bathrooms and the budget at the same time. And I'm so grateful to her for that, and I have tried to have a leadership style that is collaborative, one that brings people together and takes ideas from all types of voices. Since then, I've learned that it's important to us to maintain the customer assistance program, which we tripled in the last budget process, so that more people could have an opportunity to have assistance with their electric bills, especially the disabled and the low income. I've also worked very hard to revitalize Waller Creek and have worked even harder to make sure that the city was a player in helping with the school district with the school finance issues. We actually joined the law. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Mr. Orshalik, your opening statement, please.
I'm David Orshalik. I'm here to offer you a clear choice for Austin's next mayor. Listen carefully to my opponents. They'll repeat our problems, they'll cite statistics, but they won't offer real solutions. That's why I'm running for mayor. They'll talk about affordability and then support a bad rail design that will increase taxes and our cost of living. I have a 6-step plan to save Austin. It's on my website at orshalikformayor.com. Here are some specifics. I will demand a long-term strategic plan for an efficient and responsive city government. We will stop external recruiting and subsidies and focus on local businesses to create jobs in all fields. We will work with nonprofits and others to build substantial affordable housing on city land. We will expand I-35, MOPAC, and other existing roads to reduce our traffic issues. Austin does not need a so-called new way forward. We need a whole new direction.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Mr. Adler.
I've lived in Austin for 36 years, and I love this city. I'm concerned Austin's at a tipping point. And if we're going to preserve what it is that is magical and special about the spirit and soul of Austin, then we do need a new way forward. We actually have to deal with traffic congestion. We have to solve the affordability crisis we have. We have to reform the property tax system and the permitting process. We have to preserve and protect the neighborhoods and the environment, and we need to support our schools. I'm Steve Adler. I've spent a lifetime negotiating common ground. I've battled in the legislature for school children. I have protected women and workers against abuse and discrimination in court. You know, we can keep going the way we've always been going, and things won't get any better. In fact, things are going to get worse. Or we can use this opportunity to choose a brighter future, to pick new leaders, and to move forward in a new way. Thank you.
Thank you all for your opening statements. In case anyone's curious why we put you in this order, it's just this is the order you appear on the ballot, and we'll be switching out who answers questions first, so it's not continuously in the same order. So we began the opening statements with Todd Phelps. Let's start our first question with Mike Martinez. Mr. Martinez, and all of you will be answering this question. This morning we learned that a second Dallas healthcare worker contracted the Ebola virus. What would you do as mayor in the unlikely event that an Ebola case were confirmed in the city of Austin, or if there were another public health emergency of similar severity?
Obviously, as a firefighter, I have extensive experience and background in dealing with dynamic situations and broad-based emergencies. The first thing we have to do is ensure that we have the right protocols in place, that we're asking the right questions, and determining where those individuals, who they've been in contact with, where they've been, and how they arrived to the position that they are today. We also have to isolate the incident immediately, as well as everyone who's been in contact with them. As mayor, though, the best resource I can provide is the most timely and accurate information possible to our citizens. An Ebola crisis is a global crisis, not an Austin crisis. I dare say it's difficult to be prepared as you have to be, but we have to put every measure in place. This is just the beginning of this global crisis. We can do better. We can respond in an appropriate manner. But as mayor, you have to get the information out to those citizens. My background as a firefighter has prepared me well for incidents like this, and I look forward to protecting our city as mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Stevens, same question to you.
All of the above. I've had extensive experience in industry solving problems, working with diverse groups of people, complex technical industry, but yet problems arise that we haven't seen before. We also would have to consider our the CDC and other agencies that are the experts and bring them in to advise us, follow their advice, triage patients, segregate people who have been exposed, and make certain that all of the protocols are in place so that we don't get surprised and we don't find ourselves lacking a protocol that is a proven method.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole.
As mayor, if an Ebola virus was to break out in Austin, I think it would be central to the mayor's job to make sure that we are having communication with the public and collaboration among all the governmental entities, in particular the federal, state, and local entities and all our hospital organizations. I would make a call immediately to the other cities that have faced this crisis and see what they have done and what they would recommend, and try to put those into place and stay in constant contact with the federal authorities.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cole. Mr. Orshalik, your response.
The mayor must take a leadership position. He must ask the public for calm and ensure public safety. He must ask the public for their cooperation. And he could even cite FDR's quote, "All we have to fear is fear itself." He should make sure that he organizes and backs up the city manager and other city resources, works with other healthcare resources, both at the county level and the city level. And he must ensure that the city of Austin becomes an accurate source of information for the public.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Mr. Adler.
You know, if something horrible like that were to happen in this city, there's a pre-existing protocol to deal with it. And I think the mayor needs to make sure that the protocol is being implemented by the first responders and by the healthcare professionals. I think at that point, the mayor's job is to rally and to support and to be there in case that protocol, for whatever reason, doesn't perform or breaks down in some way. Most significantly, it would be the mayor's responsibility to negotiate, not to negotiate, to communicate with the public so that the public knows at all times what it is that's happening, because the lack of knowledge can create fear and panic, and you want to work and make sure that that doesn't happen. And I would probably also say a prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. And lastly, Mr. Phelps.
I like that prayer thing. So the first thing I would do is not let politics get in the way that is within our different levels of authority and within our state and federal government, as has happened, for instance, in Katrina. I would listen to the most intelligent people that have the most experience. That's obvious. You're going to enact the protocol. You're going to cooperate with the federal agencies such as the CDC. But I would also be fearless in leading us out of a dangerous position and veil us as much as possible. And I wouldn't let politics influence me in any way. This is my first time to run, and I would lead us out of that problem the best that I could.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. I'll hand things over to my co-moderator, Shannon Wolfson of KXAN. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, good evening. Thank you all for being here. My question is, Lakes Travis and Buchanan are the water reservoirs that serve Austin. They're only 34% full today. The LCRA forecasts our water reservoirs could hit the lowest levels on record next year. What would you do as mayor to guarantee a stable supply of water for the city of Austin? Let's start with Mr. Stevens.
We have a crisis of water availability in our region. We have major political powers pulling at ownership and control of aquifers around Austin. We need to make certain that we have the resources available for the future. One thing I would do is quit wasting water. We need to make certain that we address our infrastructure needs and make certain we're not wasting water by losing water through broken pipes, leaking pipes. We need to ask industrial and educational institutions, commercial institutions, to stop watering grass. We need to move to a southwestern mode of landscaping. We need to conference with mayors and other leaders from the Southwest and get their advice on how to best manage water resources. And we need to make smart choices and inspire other Austinites to work with us to conserve water and not waste water.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole.
We definitely have a major challenge with our water, and one of the ways that the Water Conservation Task Force has recommended that we deal with that is through conservation, and I am a huge advocate of continuing to do that. And they've also recommended that we look at other water sources, in particular reclaimed water, which the city has done some of that, and we need to do even more of that, investment in reclaimed water to increase our water supply. And finally, the other thing we really need to do is look at our contract with LCRA. We are not getting a good bargain there. A lot of that contract inures to the benefit of rice farmers downstream, and we have to really be able to go to the legislature and make good arguments why we should have a more favorable position in that contract.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Mr. Orshalik.
Yes, the Water Task Force recently met and gave a report, and they came up with many, many things that we could do here in Austin. And what that pointed out was we have done a very poor job of strategic planning. In fact, one of their recommendations is that we have a water master plan. And I asked them, is that a strategic plan? They said, yes. I said, what would the planning horizon be? They said 25 years. That's exactly what I'm recommending for the city of Austin, that we have a 25-year planning horizon for a strategic plan. This way, nothing would catch us by surprise. It would include every aspect of the city and every aspect of the quality of life of Austinites. They came up with a lot of recommendations such as conservation, reuse. I think they also touched on the fact that we have leaking pipes, we have to fix our infrastructure. And if absolutely necessary, if we continue with a drought for a very long period of time, we can do what the city of Dallas did, and that is to go into East Texas and build another water reservoir if we absolutely have to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Mr. Adler.
There are about 690,000 acre-feet right now in the Highland Lakes. We use about 130,000 acre-feet. We lose about 110 to evaporation. So you can look and see the problem we have. We're having lower inflows now, the fourth lowest in recorded history. So we have a problem. You know, we're going to be asked soon to pay $1 billion to buy water supplies east of Texas and bring them in. We should be doing a lot more conservation and water reuse before we ever get to that place. The city of San Antonio reuses 40% of its water. You know how much water the city of Austin reuses? 3%. 3%. We have to do a lot better job. You know, this council let about 450,000 acre-feet go downstream about 3 years ago. We went downstream to rice farmers that are paying pennies on the dollar because they have a contract for interruptible service, but we have a firm commitment. We need to stand on our rights.
Mr. Adler, thank you. Mr. Phelps.
Well, first off, anybody that tells you that they have all the answers is probably lying on this one. As mayor, I would make sure that we obviously have the 50-year hedge with the LCRA in the deepest part of real estate in Lake Travis. But what's not happening is that our tributaries are being blocked because the Corps of Engineers are not able to unblock those various tributaries because the state's not cooperating as much as they should. I work at the state level to help do that. I would also encourage xeriscaping and as much conservation as possible followed up with an audit in our infrastructure for water waste. And in addition to that, if we need to make sure that we're not letting the water down whatsoever downstream. And we also, if we have to, look for other regional sources and look at things that match Austin, things like desal and otherwise. But conservation, audit the infrastructure, open up the tributaries.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mr. Martinez.
Thanks, Shannon. It's a great question. On the campaign trail, our top three priorities are affordability, transportation, and water. And water is not just an Austin issue. It's a Texas issue, and we are in a crisis. We must continue our conservation measures. Our community has embraced conservation like no one ever thought we would, and they've done extremely well. But we have major other entities that are drawing from Lake Travis as their source of water who have different set of conservation policies. So the first thing we need to do is implement a rule that everyone drawing from the same source must adhere to the same conservation measures so that we can protect what little of that beautiful resource that we have in Lake Travis. Secondly, we do have to replace leaking infrastructure. We lose millions of gallons of water a day. We can create good green jobs by entering into a program to replace that leaking infrastructure and save millions of gallons of water a day. The third thing that we can do is the water reuse that was mentioned. I led the effort to create pilot programs throughout the city to improve our gray water reuse.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Thank you all for your responses. The next question is coming from my co-moderator, Mike Keenan, from the Austin Monitor.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, y'all, for being here. The City of Austin's proposition would spend $1 billion on an urban rail line and road upgrades. What would you do, regardless of whether Prop 1 passes, to address the city's transportation problems? Ms. Cole, I believe we start with you this time.
Prop 1 puts forth a comprehensive plan involving both roads and rail, and I led the effort to add the roads to the plan. And it contemplates that we will have a multimodal system if it passes. But I believe your question asks, what if it doesn't pass? And if it does not pass, I would be the first to convene the stakeholders, go to the individual districts with the individual council members, and talk to people, see what led to the defeat of the proposition. After all, the affordable housing bonds did not pass, and that caused a crisis in our community, and I would do the same thing, go back out to the stakeholders, inform them of what led to the first decision and get feedback from them on what we could do to address our traffic congestion issues.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Orshalik.
As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I have a 6-step plan to save Austin, and 3 of those steps are directed toward our transportation problems. Step number 4 is that we fix Cap Metro so we have a competent and reliable mass transit partner now. We need that for everything from transit-oriented development to accurate transportation planning. We currently don't do very good transportation planning. The next step is to create a true transportation infrastructure backbone that serves all of Austin, as well as fixing our roads and highways now. It is amazing to me that I-35 is failing, and they have no plans to fix it. We need to make roads like North Lamar, South Lamar, Burnett Road, South Congress, into 6-lane divided boulevards before we put any more density along those roads. We also have to create a bus rapid transit system with 22 transit centers across Austin to serve all of Austin.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Adler.
You know, when the current council came into office 8 years ago, we were the 26th most congested city in the country. 4 years ago, we were the 16th most congested, and today we're the 4th most congested. We're headed in the wrong direction. You know, the Transportation Institute tells us that if we built everything in our 20-year wish list, and we can't because it costs too much, but if we did build everything, at the end of 20 years, the drive time between Austin and Round Rock is 3 hours. We can't build our way out of this. We can't buy our way out of this. We need the infrastructure. But we also need to look at this as a land planning question. It's a question of where we live and how we live. You know, Austin in 20 years probably has a midtown area so that there's an alternate downtown urban center so that everybody's not trying to drive and ultimately live downtown. You know, if we did aggressively staggered work hours, the state, at the University of Texas, the Capitol, city government, county government, large 3 or 4 employers downtown, we could dramatically change things.
Thank you, sir. That's your time.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Phelps.
Just want to start this by saying I really enjoy every person up here personally. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm the only candidate that has been consistently against this rail plan from the beginning from an affordability standpoint. And it's disingenuous for somebody to propose a property tax exemption, then turn around and propose a plan that will nullify that almost exactly on predicted amounts. Leffenwell, on his low prediction, predicted that the average family would spend $180 annually because of this rail bond. And a property tax exemption, which I'm for immediately, would cost about $190. So the way to do it is give the property tax exemption and not be for the rail. The Daily Texan came out against it today. Mike, Steve, and Cheryl are all for it. I've been consistently against it, and I'm for Austin and for families being able to live here.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
So I believe the question was, what do you do if Proposition 1 fails? And it's in the hands of the voters. We don't have an option. On November 5th, if it fails on the 4th, on November 5th, we have to go right back to work dealing with the gridlock and congestion that we face. We go right back to work improving Capital Metro as we've done over the last 4 years. We go back adding bus rapid transit lines, and we go back to work on our road infrastructure, our sidewalks, our urban trails and bikeways. We don't have an option to sit and not do anything. I'll be supporting Proposition 1, but I realize it's ultimately up to the voters. The beauty of Proposition 1 is if it passes or fails, we are in a position to take the next big step. And if that means adding more bus lines, Capital Metro is prepared financially, managerial-wise, and capable of handling that big next step.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stevens.
We have a transparency deficit in this system that has been enabled by the incumbent candidates running for mayor and the other city council members. When you have Project Connect spending tax dollars to promote a bond proposal, and when that Project Connect president is a vice president of HNTB, the very sole contractor offering pricing on a system he wants to sell which will benefit his company, we have a transparency problem that needs to be fixed today, and you can fire HNTB by electing Stevens in November. We have to fix our transportation problems, and on my interactive campaign, on my blog, austinbluedogblog.com, I identified 20 intersections that we can fix, and there is a fix for I-35 by building the unfunded connectors at 183 and linking the new improved 183 with South SH71. That'll be your bypass for I-35, so I do have a plan, and I know how to get it done.
Thank you, sir. Nathan?
Rising property values in Austin are pushing tax bills higher. What would you do, if anything, to change how much property tax people pay? And if you were to reduce that amount of property tax that people pay, what city programs would you cut to pay for it? And the question begins with Mr. Orshalik, I believe? Or is it Ms. Cole?
It is Mr. Orshalik.
Mr. Orshalik, your time.
I am for cutting property taxes, all property taxes, by at least 20%. And that's not just for the city, it's for all taxing authorities. How do we do that? Well, we introduced operational efficiencies. How do we do that? Strategic planning, business process reengineering, and best practices. We lack those modern management tools in our city. We lack those modern management tools in all taxing authorities. AISD, the county, the city, ACC. Affordability can be addressed in a number of ways. We have a supply and demand problem in Austin. We have way too much demand for housing and way too little supply of available housing. We need to reverse that. We need to stop outside recruitment, and we need a massive housing boom in Austin.
Mr. Orshalik, thank you. Mr. Adler.
You know, we have a tool that we are able to use and we should use, and it's a 20% homestead exemption. It's the same exemption that Houston gives its citizens, as does Dallas and Fort Worth, even Travis County does. And it is not something that just helps the rich, it helps the people who need it most. The people in the bottom 20%, property tax burden is 4 times greater than the top 1%. 80% of the homes that are owned in this city are valued at $400,000 or less. This is property tax relief that is needed by people that are facing losing their homes because they can't pay their property tax. We have a tool we should use, and we should use it. And it is not sufficient to say that we're going to go to the state and ask them to change the law. Because the law, to give us more tools, people have been trying to change for the last 10, 15, 20 years. That is not a policy. We have a tool we can use, and we should use it. How do you pay for it? You can pay for it out of budget surpluses, or you could adjust the tax rate and keep it revenue neutral, which would serve as a tax shift to commercial properties ever so slightly.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Phelps.
I want to use that tool immediately and not wait 4 years like Mr. Adler. We also have another tool, which is called not supporting this rail tax nor bundling the roads to deceive the voters. In addition to that, I would like to work with the state to protect our artist community and renters by expanding these similar types of exemptions to multifamily and rental properties, so that these types of heavy taxes are not passed along to the people that they hurt the most. It's one of my main things I want to do. As far as waste, I think that I would start with the brand new code enforcement vehicles that are driving around Northwest Hills trying to get people to tear down their tree houses. And there's a lot of other things that we can address centrally within our city budget and call for an audit. I've got 10 seconds. I want to have four decks on 35 with low profile and get the lights off 360 immediately with the money we have.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mr. Martinez.
Nathan, we have an affordability issue in Austin, but you shouldn't be making proposals that automatically, disproportionately have a rise in cost of living in Austin for 55% of the population. Those are the people who need our help the most. We need to continue to hold the line during budget deliberations, and that is where you cut unnecessary programs. When the city manager makes a proposal with 700 vacancies and no plan to hire them, you challenge those assumptions and you scrub that budget. You remove those multi-million-dollar items. We've been able to hold our tax rate flat or lower it as we've done this year. Now, while I realize people's property tax bill may have gone up, it's because of the other taxing entities. It's because of property appraisals. We need to go to the legislature to have full disclosure of commercial sale property so that we can levelize the property tax appraisal system that is causing this major affordability crisis in Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Stevens.
My philosophy on budget, before we make any major capital improvements and before we make any major decisions, we have to three-dimensional due diligence on the idea, on the process, on what we're buying and who's benefiting. And in public leadership, we have to have a fourth dimension of responsibility, and that is to make sure that every minority in this community is getting their fair share of their tax dollar for the infrastructure in their neighborhoods. And the first conversation I'm going to have with the city manager and then his subordinates will be that I will request each department head to provide a plan to reduce their budget by 5% over the coming year, implement that plan, and the ones that stick to the plan and succeed will have the best chance of retaining their jobs as management in the city. We'll move on with enabling employees and rewarding employees for ideas they put into action.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole.
It is very important that we show the city that we can live within our means, and there's no firmer way that we do that than through the property tax rate. But we have to recognize that there are actually 5 taxing jurisdictions, and the one with the highest rate is the schools, not the city. And the city has consistently lowered its property tax rate, but the other jurisdictions have either raised theirs or really the property tax amount is a function of the appraised value. I would champion and have championed and worked with the other council members that we actually worked with the appraisal district to hire an expert and go in with them to fight about the disproportionate values between commercial property and residential property. This year, we also granted a small homestead exemption of $5,000, which was a flat amount, and it wasn't on a percentage basis, so it applied equally to everyone. And we also granted an exemption for the elderly and the disabled members of the community. I think it's important that we continue to address this.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. I'd like to remind anyone listening tonight on KUT.org or on KXAN's website or KUT 90.5 that they can join the conversation right now using the hashtag BBMayor. And we'll be asking, please ask questions of these candidates. We'll be using your questions later this evening. Shannon?
The next question is, under the new system, you will be the only citywide elected official. How will you work to represent everyone in the city? And how will you work to be sure your council colleagues keep that same concept in mind? We'll start with Mr. Adler.
You know, we might have 10 districts, but we have one city. And I think that we have to look at city governance structure and make sure that it's set up in a new way, very different from how we have city government set up now. You know, every time I see the city council meeting at 3 o'clock in the morning, making policy decisions from the dais on resolutions that have been filed 3 and 4 days earlier, that have never been vetted, I get concerned. We used to tell, Diane and I, she's here, we have 3 girls, and we used to tell them that nothing good happens after midnight, and I think that that's true about city government too. We need to change the structure. We need to have more committee structure. We need to have better vetting of materials before they get to the city council. But the city council needs to come together as a group. We need to curate the first 100 days so that people start thinking more policy-oriented than individual dispute-oriented. You know, it's the mayor's job to make sure that everyone comes together and that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we have that opportunity with this 10-1 gift.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Phelps.
Well, I've learned things over time being a musician and dealing with several lead players at the same time, and that's what we're going to have. In Austin, we don't have a strong mayor system, so the mayor is essentially going to be just another council member with a larger voice outside of Austin. So the best thing to do there is, I can use the analogy, in addition to my professional career, I've been a musician, had Todd Phelps Band, Mom likes that name. But anyway, so when I first started my band, you had several lead players that would just kind of, when I first got them together, they just kind of sit there and play what they wanted to play in a room. And it would be cacophonous and it would just sound like noise. So I want to rise above the noise of city government and identify each person's strength and help them come together to work with each other to make something in concert. Something that's not balkanized, but something that's amazing that Austin has never seen. The great thing about 10-1 is that new voices are going to be included, and it's not just going to be at large.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mr. Martinez.
The next mayor's number one priority is going to be getting this new form of government off to the right start. So you have to have a mayor that's going to build the consensus among those 10 new council members. Regardless of what district you live in or what district you represent as a council member, I promise you there are common issues. You care about safe neighborhoods. You care about city services running on time. You care whether or not your firefighters, police, and EMS have the equipment that's necessary to do their job. So we build that foundation on those common grounds. When and if we have our differences, that's when you have to negotiate with your colleagues. That's when you have to understand that we have to form those coalitions so that we can move forward for the greater good of the entire community. While the new council members may be districted council members, they also have to understand that they are Austin council members. Just like our legislature, just like our county commissioners, I don't just go to Representative Dukes, who is my state representative. I go to Representative Rodriguez, Representative Howard, and others because they are Texas representatives.
Mr. Martinez, thank you. Mr. Stevens.
After I finished that conversation with the city manager and the department heads about how we need to save 5% and how we start to plan how we're going to disperse that $150 million back to the city, I plan on working with the city council members in a way that I've worked with people in the airline industry. We had teams of people overhauling large aircraft. We had engineers, mechanics, avionics people. We had people from every walk of the human genome. We had people who were gayer than I could ever pretend to be, and they were on my team, and we worked together. We didn't care about our differences, whether you're red or blue, left or right, and Austin is that kind of city where we have that kind of spirit. We can preserve our downtown entertainment district and grow away from the downtown so that we don't put so much pressure on East Austin and Central Austin. We can make this place even better than it is today, and it's already the best place in the world. I love this city.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole.
This new 10-1 system has led to 78 people running for council. That is incredible. That's an incredible amount of civic engagement. And I can tell you that the first thing we need to do is stop worrying about whether or not these people are going to be able to look out for the interest of the entire city, because I've seen them. I've seen them at Austin Energy Forums. I've seen them at water forums. I've seen them at forums dealing with racial equality, issues that don't necessarily pertain in a large way to a particular district, but citywide issues. So what I would do is work with them on the issues that may be of a particular concern to their district, and also work together on citywide issues.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Mr. Orshalik.
I'm the only neighborhood advocate and activist running for mayor. I've worked on a lot of quality of life issues. In fact, I believe it's all about the quality of life in our neighborhoods. I think for a long time, the neighborhoods in Austin have been ignored by the downtown city council. And I think that the new city council will have both common cause and common issues. So they will be more than happy to cooperate with each other to finally bring city resources and attention to all neighborhoods in Austin. I think the mayor, as the only at-large member of the city council, must set a vision and a standard. That vision has to include all Austinites. And I think the standard is very simple. My standard would be, if it's good for Austinites, do it. If it's bad for Austinites, stop it.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Thank you all. Mike?
Thanks, Shannon. This next question actually popped up on Twitter, but it was on our list too, so we'll go ahead. Should the City of Austin continue to offer property tax cuts to companies to incentivize them to move to Austin or to expand here? And I believe we're to you, Mr. Phelps.
Well, I've never really understood why you need to pay people to move to Austin. But I definitely want us to be on the forefront technologically and on the forefront of transportation solutions. So there's a balance there, but I can tell you right now, if they're going to try to do things like TIFs and stuff like that, we have to do some due diligence and make sure that the people that live within those zones that are Austinites are protected from, see, that they're anticipating that they're getting paid back by these property tax increases, and it just pushes people like myself and my friends out of Austin, and people like you out there out of Austin. It gentrifies East Austin and South Austin. So the thing that we need to do, if we're going to do these type of things, is make sure that people that live there are protected, and that it comes from somewhere else and it's not coming from their particular zone that they live in. And we got to look at the local businesses. Local businesses need to come first.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
Mike, I led the effort for 18 months to change our economic incentive policy so that it reflected Austin's values. So before a company can even stick their hand out and come knock on our door, they know that they're going to have to pay a living wage, prevailing wage, provide health care benefits, and domestic partner benefits. That's up front before they ask. Then we get to negotiate for even more Austin values. I believe it's time, though, that we redouble our efforts and change our policy so that it reflects our local small existing businesses. Whether you're a company employing 5 people or a company bringing 500 jobs here, a job is a job. And if it's a good paying middle class job, that's what we need to be fighting for. I think when these companies come to Austin, people tend to feel like they're bringing transferred employees in. We need to continue to work on that policy so that if we use incentives moving forward, that it actually go to folks in Austin, Texas who need the jobs. But I also believe we have to have the local component even much stronger in the policy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stevens.
Well, if you elect Stevens for mayor, you're going to elect a person who knows the small business community, a member of the Austin Independent Business Association. And as an employer in this city, when a gentleman came in from the county one day and asked my staff about the business and wanted to tell me about the rendition form for property tax, it was the same time the domain was going up, and we were giving these massive subsidies to this developer to bring in out-of-town businesses. And I thought there was something askew. I believe that if this future city council wants to give away any money to attract people to come, it ought to be to regional small business. I'm a small business person. I value the benefit of having jobs in this community. There's nothing better than having a job. And small business provides more of them than anybody else, more collectively than big business. And they are the creative elements that make this city thrive. I'm for local all the way.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cole.
Back in 2008, when we were in a recession, I think it was much more important that we emphasize economic development deals because we really needed the jobs. Now we are experiencing unprecedented economic prosperity in certain sections of our community. And so we can afford to look at economic development deals with more scrutiny and ask more tough questions because those companies need to reflect Austin values. I led the effort to make sure that we included on one of our deals the hard to employ as part of the negotiating points. And I also think it's important that we also emphasize that companies hire local and not transfer people because that is a concern. But we also have to think of things as not a cookie cutter approach. We have to look at it based on the circumstances that we are in at the time.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Orshalik.
We need to reverse the inflationary policies of the City Council. We have to stop external recruiting and all subsidies. and we have to focus on local businesses. Studies show that this is the best way to build an economy and jobs. Our city council broke the economic law of supply and demand. They recruited companies and outsiders to our detriment. They ignored and harmed local business. They focused on high tech to the exclusion of the other jobs needed for a robust economy. We need to end the inflationary policies of the City Council, including their badly designed and exclusionary urban rail bond proposal. We turn the focus of our economic development department inward so it becomes a true business consultancy and ombudsman for local businesses and startups. We partner with the Chamber of Commerce to do the same thing. We bring about a renaissance in local business.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler.
I would keep incentives in the toolbox that the city has to be able to use, because I think there's an appropriate place for them. But we need to change the metric when we use them. We need to change how we measure success. Right now, when we give an economic incentive, we use an algorithm that looks at a return on investment as the primary factor, and we need to take a look at a return on values. We need to incentivize or invest in bringing middle-class jobs and growing middle-class jobs for people who already live here and training those people to take those middle-class jobs. We are at the top of lots of lists, and there's great economic growth that's happening here. We're bringing in more jobs than anyone else, but 60% of the jobs we're bringing in don't pay a living wage, and the city can't survive that way. So I would use that tool, but I would use that tool and redirect that tool in a way that enables us to bridge the gap between the middle-class jobs that exist and the people in our community that should be trained to take them.
Thank you, sir. Nathan?
If you're just joining us, this is Ballot Boxing, the mayoral forum on KUT 90.5 and KUT.org. We are live streaming it thanks to KXAN as well. We have 6 candidates for mayor here, and we're asking them questions. They each have a minute to respond, and we're going to continue this till about 8:30 this evening. The next question has been asked a few times on Twitter in various ways, and I'm going to ask it this way. Austin is the only large, fast-growing city in America with a shrinking African-American population, according to researchers at the University of Texas. Why is this happening, and what would you do to address it? And I believe we start with Mr. Martinez.
We start by changing our economic incentive policies that creates middle-class jobs for folks that need it the most. This is exactly a direct example of where those jobs are needed. And when I say where, I mean geographically as well. If we recruit companies and if we build companies that will stay in Austin and move into our desired development zone, which is largely East Austin, that is where we'll find the folks that are the highest unemployed. African Americans also are the highest unemployed in terms of percentage numbers of the population. So we have to target that population. We have to provide an Austin and policies that demonstrate that Austin wants to maintain the diversity that we've enjoyed for so many years. That is what I'll do as mayor, is continue working to build that middle class so that everyone can enjoy in the prosperity that is Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Stevens.
Yes, jobs are key to survival of any city and to retaining any segment of the population. And what is driving African Americans out is driving a lot of people out of the city. So I am all in for training and making sure that programs in East Austin would draw students from high schools into trade programs, into job training programs, and magnet schools toward that would direct kids into higher education so that they have the skill sets to maintain a wage that will keep them in Austin. It's very important that we focus on education, and we have to start from the ground up. We have to remember that pre-K programs and after-school programs have gone unfunded. I might add also that I've lived and worked with African Americans all my life, from the military on, and I was kind of surprised when I was the only candidate at a recent forum Sunday morning who said I wasn't interested in replacing our city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole.
I think it's important to the entire city, and especially the African American population, that we maintain a quality of life for everyone, especially the African American population who is leaving, that is equal to that of the rest of Austin. And I think we have a challenge, especially when it comes to employment opportunities. When Kevin and I graduated from college, we had nice paying jobs available. And I don't think those opportunities are being made available in the private sector or the government sector for the African American population at the same rates that they exist for the rest of the population. And the same holds true for educational opportunities. I think many African Americans are leaving because of concern with their children and their opportunities for advancement in the education field, working in the field, and also their own education of their children.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Mr. Orshalik.
Your question was about the shrinking African American population in Austin, and that we're the largest city that's experiencing that. And one of the reasons is we have a critical mass of African Americans in Austin that is missing. In other words, we have a very small African American population. Other cities have a much larger population. Our problems are exacerbated by our rapid growth. We've got gentrification, rapidly rising property values. This is due to the inflationary policies of the City Council. We must reverse those. We need to grow jobs internally and focus on more than just high tech. The city says we're 40,000 affordable housing units in the hole. I think it's probably twice that. We must have a massive housing boom in Austin, and there are ways to do this. I've got it on my website at orshalikformayor.com. Just look at Mueller Development. We closed that airport down 15 years ago, and we've still only built out 40% of the housing stock there. We need to change that. We need to have a sense of urgency.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Mr. Adler.
So have you all heard the number that there are 110 people that are moving to Austin every day? It's not the right number. It's a net number. There are 150 people moving to Austin every day. There are 40 people that are leaving. And we talk about the 150 are moving in. We don't talk about the 40 that are leaving, and we need to. We have an affordability crisis in this city, and we need to fix that if we're going to keep the people that are here. We need to do the homestead exemption because we have people who have lived here for a long time that are losing their homes because they can't afford the property taxes. But we also have to look at education. I've never understood why the mayor and the city council have not made education a priority, because there's nothing that impacts the quality of life the same way that that issue does. And it would be a priority in my administration. We need to have universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. We need to help support the schools pull down the state money and the federal money that we're not accessing right now. We need to use the schools as community centers. We need to help with middle-class jobs. And we need to leverage, attract, and keep the African American student population that comes to the city.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Phelps.
I grew up here, as I can reiterate. It's changed drastically in the last 20 years. Now, what's going on is the other three major candidates are listening to the same consultants that for the last 20 years have kept our city council from offering any property tax relief to the African American community to help them stay. And I don't understand how you can talk about a property tax exemption, then turn around and want to spend more on an insane bond proposal or other insane bond proposals. This one that's up will push more African Americans out of Austin, more Hispanics from Austin. It doesn't matter the culture any longer. It's pushing us all out. And we need to protect what's left of the African American community. And the way to do that is not with being behind one thing and talking out of both sides of your mouth and listening to the same people that got us in this traffic crisis, got us in this affordability crisis for the last 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Shannon?
Thank you, Nathan. This question has been submitted by some of our viewers and I think some listeners as well. And the question is the current city manager, Mark Ott, doing a good job? What, if anything, would you like to see the person who manages the city do differently? And we'll begin with Mr. Stevens.
Well, as I said the other day, we were asked whether we would be interested in, whether we would consider replacing the city manager. And my answer is no. I'll go in with a clean slate. I'll have a conversation with the city manager and with his subordinate management. And we will, after consulting with city council, we'll give them new instructions. We'll measure the success of their performance, and we'll treat them like any employee with respect and dignity. I think he's done a terrific job so far from what I've seen, but yet I've not worked with him. I've not worked with any of the city employees. and I'll give them all a fair chance and give them all the tools that they need and all the training they need and the motivation they need. I'll try to rework social services so that it takes a lot of the burden off the county taxpayer through HHS and try to get more federal funds to help people, put more people on the MAP card, for instance. That could save tens of millions of dollars for taxpayers we could pass back through rebates.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole?
The city council sets policy and the city manager implements that policy. To the extent the city manager is not implementing the policy that the council has passed by resolution, then that is a cause for concern, and we should, of course, discipline him in accordance with that finding. I am supportive of the city manager, and I have been. He's won a lot of awards for his management of the city. My chief concern as mayor would be him continuing to implement the policies that the council passes, and that would especially include the resolutions of the district representative.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Orshalik?
I was very excited when the new city manager came in 2008. He stated as his goal that he wanted Austin to be the best managed city in the country. It's even on our website, almost every page. But since that time, he's been the invisible man. It's like he's AWOL, away without official leave. I think that I would like to see a forensic audit of the city budget so we could restore trust and confidence in the city and how it's managed. And you're asking, what would I like to see him do differently? I'd like to see him implement strategic planning, business process reengineering, and finally adopt best practices. He talked about it in 2009. I still don't see those. In fact, the CIO, the Chief Information Officer of the city, does not even report directly to him. That is a fundamental mistake and a worst practice.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler?
You know, it's my understanding that when the current council hired Mark Ott as city manager, and they went through that interview process, they were trying to get a city manager that was different than the one that came before him. And they asked all the candidates, they said, do you understand that there is a dark line that separates what's policy and what's management? And will you agree to stay on your side of that line if we stay on our side of that line? And I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask, because I don't think there is a dark line between policy and management. I think there is a huge gray area and a huge number of things that could both be policy or management, and in fact are both policy and management. And I think that the healthiest relationships that exist between managers and policy boards is when both recognize that that exists, and both of them recognize that in order for the city to do well, it's not a question of deciding and figuring out whether that's policy or that's management, but it's more getting together and figuring out what's best for the city.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Phelps?
Well, Mark Hott used to live near one of my friends, and I hear he's a pretty nice guy. And you know, this is where I'm going to, as mayor, I'm going to listen to the community, and I'm going to listen to my council, and we're going to come to a consensus on whether we should move forward with him or not. And you know, I'll tell you right now, if he pushes us, you know, tries to lead us in a direction that's not affordable for people that live in Austin, you know, we'll be the leaders. He needs to answer to us. But I hear he's a nice individual, so I'm going to listen to the community. I'm going to listen to my council. And I would encourage everyone out there to do your due diligence in this election and dig into the internet and find out really what the people that have been leading us for the last 9 years think about him and what's happened. And I say he stays unless they decide something else.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mr. Martinez?
Shannon, there are 5 city employees that are direct appointees of the Austin City Council, and they shouldn't be used as political ploys in an election cycle. You know, our city manager and the rest of those appointees are held to very high standards, and they have done great things for our city, and they've also done things that we've had to take corrective measures in their employee evaluations. Like any direct employee, if you've ever been a supervisor and you've had direct reports, part of your job as their supervisor, if you will, is to ensure that they understand what they're doing well and what they're not doing well. We'll continue through that process in those annual evaluations as the city charter allows us.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Thank you all. I believe Mike is going to go to Twitter now.
We got a bunch of really good questions, and we'll start with this one. And I believe it's your turn, Ms. Cole. The 2.0 officer to citizen ratio is something that's employed by the city to determine how many police officers it employs. Where are you on that ratio? Do you think it needs adjustment? What do you think?
The 2.0 ratio has been employed ever since I have been on the council, and I don't think that we need to use a cookie-cutter formula. I have supported it, and sometimes it has been a little higher and almost close to the 2.0. I think it's important to look at the extent to which people are satisfied with public safety and our community liaisons, and whether we having enough representatives in our park and police patrol, and whether we remain a low-crime city. And as long as we do those things, then I think we can continue to support our police department. But I do recognize that it is a large chunk of our budget, and all of it should be up for consideration.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Orshalik.
I think that we're pretty close to that ratio. And of course, if we do nothing else, we have to improve the ratio because we need better policing in our neighborhoods. However, we have an opportunity to improve the management of our police department tremendously and provide them with the resources that will let them be even more effective and efficient. For example, we can free up officers to go out and do community policing if we don't tie them up in our jail system and in our hospital system. So how can we do that? We could have our own sobriety center. We could have our own jail for the city instead of using the county facilities. We could also have transport vehicles so police could go back to being in the street. And then most importantly of all the management improvements that I've talked about in the past should also be implemented by the police department.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler.
You know, Austin is one of the safest cities, violent crime, of any city in the country. And that's one of the things that makes this a good place to live. It helps with our quality of life in this city. But that comes at a cost, and it is a very large part of our budget. The ratio that you have is something that's applied, looks at other cities. You know, there was a study ordered by the city council that came back that indicated that the way that we police and what we do in our city, that ratio wasn't high enough. I think we need to take a look at what we do in this city, because our public safety staffs to their most demand-sensitive moment, which would be in our city festivals when they're operating and people have to be pulled in. I think we need to take a look at how we do festivals in this city, how we do the things that drives the demand that we have. You know, the city of Austin just did a study of festivals. It came out 2 weeks ago. I was looking for a 15-year horizon on that study that would actually look at those questions. But it turned out it was a study that only looked at the next 18 months. And we need to do better.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Phelps.
I think this is an area where we do need to allocate as much funds as we can possibly bear. I was at the Police Association breakfast and spoke with a lot of those guys. Some of them I knew that were from here, and then they don't live here anymore because they can't afford to. There are police officers that are commuting from as far as San Antonio. So it speaks to the affordability crisis in your city and poor planning when your police officers cannot even afford to live within your city proper. So to answer the question, I want to spend as much money as we have to in this particular area by cutting other areas to make sure that we have a proper ratio, that Austin is safe, and that we can have more police officers living within the city from an affordability standpoint. You know, the crisis is here. Business Insider ranked us as one of the most impoverished cities, top 16 last month. We have to do something now.
Thank you, sir. That's your time. Mr. Martinez.
Mike, more doesn't always equal better. I think if we're going to tie the number of officers we have to any ratio, it should be based in science. It should be based in demand. I would dare say we'd need better training sometimes as opposed to more officers in certain scenarios. The bottom line is we have a good police department, but it's not perfect. We can do better. I am not going to commit here that we, one, either stay tied to 2.0 or increase it. I think we have to base it on things like crime and demand, which actually Chief Acevedo has actually done. He's shifted the staffing model in some of our zones around the city, our districts, to where more officers are he puts more officers in certain districts based on the call volume of emergencies that exist. That, to me, is a true measurement of how we should be providing policing. If there is no crime, if there is no need, why would you simply continue to hire more and more?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stevens.
Well, this question is part and parcel with my method of addressing government growth and city growth. I see Austin growing, and I believe that we can reduce the per capita cost of providing city services without touching employee benefits or wages. But that being said, in certain departments we need to add personnel and we need to realign. The police department is being asked to provide community policing in particular neighborhoods. I'm speaking to officers away from their commanders privately and asking about their concern already. I believe that we can engineer a way to provide community policing, to provide a police presence that is more receptive to the particular concerns of demographics within certain segments of our community, and to do it effectively. We can engineer and we can fix any problem. We're that smart in Austin. I believe we can do it, and we should do it. And we apply our resources and our intellect to it, we'll get it done.
Thank you, sir. Nathan?
Our next question comes from Twitter. First, I just want to remind everyone you're listening to Ballot Boxing, the mayoral forum on KUT 90.5. Ask your questions of these 6 candidates for Austin mayor with the hashtag BBMayor. Now, as I mentioned, our next question comes from Dan Keshet on Twitter, and he's asking about Code Next, a 2-year it's a rewrite of the city's land development code, I believe. What is your approach to Code Next? What approach would you prefer? Asks Dan Keshet. And this question goes first to Mr. Orshalik. Ms. Cole, am I right? I'm sorry, I've lost Mr. Orshalik. You gave me an expression that made me think, am I going nuts? No. Sorry David. Code Next, your thoughts?
For those who don't know, Code Next is the rewrite of the Land Development Code. I'll refer to it as the LDC. And it is required by our charter because we just changed our comprehensive plan, which is required by state law that we have a comprehensive plan. So the Land Development Code must match or be consistent with the comprehensive plan. I do not like the process we're using for Code Next. I feel that it does not include the citizens enough, especially at critical points. And most importantly, we're looking at code to make our changes instead of the comprehensive plan. We should know what the comprehensive plan requires and then do a gap analysis so we can figure out what code requires. We haven't done that. What I'm recommending, though, is that we rewrite even the comprehensive plan, because Imaginary Austin, that's my term for Imagine Austin, our comprehensive plan, does not serve the neighborhoods and the citizens of Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Mr. Adler.
I think that the code rewrite or the Code Next process is one of the most important things that the city's going to do over the next year or two. The code we have right now is 30 years old. It is based on amendment over amendment across amendment. It's difficult to apply. It's contradictory, which is why it takes so much longer to get things done in this city than in other cities, and we need to fix that. You know, ultimately at this point, we almost seem to be doing planning by exception and by variance. People start projects and they don't know where they're going to end up, but there's no measure of certainty. There's no way to predict how long it's going to take you to go through the process and where you're ultimately going to end up. And because of that, all of the land development decisions, or many of them, have to work their way to the city council in a controverted fashion in order to get resolved. And we need to do better than that. In the legal practice that I've had, I've done work with land development codes, not only in the city, but across the state. So I hope to bring some expertise to that process.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Phelps.
Well, Dan Paralak at Opticos Design, that is heading up the Code Next process, defined compatibility as an outcome without conflict. That's not encouraging enough to me. I want an outcome that is a win-win for both developers and communities. So I want to make sure that throughout this process, we don't get back to square one where we are with a permitting code that is convoluted and it's not transparent and it's not efficient, it's not good for small business, and it's not good for our communities. But I'm going to support Code Next as much as I possibly can. I would like to see, I don't want to see conflicts within city code that would prevent you from having, music venues in your walkable communities that are on the periphery of town, because we need to have things on the periphery of town where people don't have to jump in their cars and get in and out of downtown all the time. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Phelps. Mr. Martinez, you're up next.
Thanks, Nathan. Mr. Keshet is a very well-informed citizen and very active in our policy decisions. I believe what he's asking is, what approach do we support? Because there is a decision that's pending before council, and there are 3 options to the approach. One is you can consider it a superficial dusting of the code. One is a little bit deeper dive of substantive rewrite. And then there is the deep dive, which is a complete rewrite. So those are 3 approaches. Council is going to have to decide upon one. There is heavy discussion and debate as to which approach is most appropriate for the rewrite of our code. And we will make that decision ultimately. Here's what we need. We need a land development code that doesn't require you to hire an expert, a lawyer, and a permitting processor to add on an extra room to your house. And that is the goal that we should strive for, that it should be a code that everyone can understand and everyone can comply with in a reasonable manner and still be able to do the things that they need to on their property.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Stevens.
I do believe in a substantive rewrite of the code to make it more simple so that people can, more understandable to the layman. However, I believe that we need to make certain that our code is written in such a way that we don't drive away home builders, that we don't drive away investment in our city, that we encourage development in areas of the city away from the core so that we don't densify downtown any more than we already have, and we develop along the core and build magnet retail and housing in a way that we can by partnering with master developers, we can make certain that we have the right amount of applications for Section 8 and other assisted housing for people who who've had misfortune in their lives or need it or otherwise qualify.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Cole.
I believe that our land development code definitely needs to be streamlined so that when you know what you want to do, such as add a garage, you can actually read about how to do that in one sitting. And that is the idea behind the rewrite. The decision that we're going to have to make about what level of rewrite is going to have to happen, that will just be based on a lot of citizens' input. The Imagine Austin plan and the comprehensive plan and now Code Next were all put together through over a 2-year process with lots of stakeholder input and lots of citizens. I don't know how anyone can actually be a good and effective mayor on this major issue if they have not taken any part at all in any of that process-oriented work that has gone into it.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Shannon Wolfson with KXAN.
Nathan, thank you. Police Chief Art Acevedo has acknowledged that this city has a drinking and driving issue. A question from Twitter is, do you believe that we need more transit, more police, or a combination to help get these numbers down? And we will start with Mr. Adler.
I have, Diane and I have 3 daughters, all now 22 to 30. And every time they would go downtown, we would get worried where they were going to be and how they were going to get home at 2 o'clock. We have a taxi system in this city that's broken, because we're encouraging people to get in their cars that shouldn't get in their cars because we don't provide the alternatives that this city needs to have. We have Uber and Lyft that over the last 2 weeks had 100,000 rides. And that tells you something. It tells us that there's technology out there that we need to be able to use in order to match supply to demand. The issue is that we have a taxi system that's broken. It's not designed to handle the festivals and the uploads that we have, and we need to do a better job. So we definitely have to do something in the city. It's not a new problem, and we need to fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Phelps.
Well, we need a new council and a new mayor that's going to allow transportation network companies to work within the city. One of the reasons I got into this race is because my friend Justin Schmidt was trying to get Sidecar greenlit for a pilot program. Mr. Martinez blocked that from going to a vote at 3 separate council meetings. That is one of the reasons I was frustrated and jumped in this. We have cars for transportation network company that work for people that work for transportation network companies. Their cars are being impounded. It's a horrible situation. I want an all of the above traffic solution. I want transportation network companies now. I want background checks for them, and then I want them to have the proper insurance, and you're good to go. I want more taxi companies. It's almost impossible to open up a taxi company in this town with the rules that Martinez is working within. And I want all the above traffic solutions, TNCs now, Uber, Lyft, Sidecar, and more of them now.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
You know, we have a transportation crisis in Austin, and we're working on every possible solution, including transportation network companies, including more public transit. But making bad choices is a personal decision. If there is a culture in Austin that exists that creates people making bad personal choices, we need to look at ourselves and take responsibility for making those bad decisions. It is not government's responsibility to create an avenue for someone to go and act irresponsibly. It is our responsibility to provide as many options as we can for public transportation. That is exactly what I've done as council. It's what I'll continue doing as mayor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stevens.
Well, this transportation question is big, and it's just like with, I disagree with Cheryl about the code next question. You don't want anyone who's been involved in that process, who's actually owes money or has received large financial contributions from donors to their campaigns. You want to replace everybody. I joined the Uber program as a driver, although I've never carried a passenger, just to find out how it worked, and got a criminal background check, got it back, and I was happy to note that I've never been arrested or been put on the sex offender list nationally, and that we do get that information. So I'm very much in favor of all of the above on transportation, except I am full stop on the urban rail. We need to extend the hours of Cap Metro from downtown to the entertainment district to outlying park and ride areas, and we need to do it as fast as possible.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Cole.
It is government's responsibility to have safe streets. And I think that to try and guarantee that, we have to have all options on the table. And that includes the TNCs, and that includes also the taxis, and it includes police, and it includes transit. We have to look at all these options as being available for people for congestion and also for the issue we have with drinking and driving. We want to address that head on. And I think only if we have all these tools in the toolbox will we be able to effectively do it.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Mr. Orshalik.
You talk about drinking and driving as a problem. It's a public safety problem. We also have the problem of public intoxication. One of the things we can do is set up sobriety centers so these infractions are not criminal offenses, but it is a terrible public safety problem, and I think the city needs to work with bar owners for better prevention of this problem. As far as transportation goes, you know, we lost the Dillo transportation system a few years ago, and we should reintroduce it as something I'm calling Dillo dollar vans. And then we could have parking lots outside the central district or places where people need to go. We could also have Austin night out shuttles. That would take care of this problem. Then people get as looped as they want to and have a ride home. But we also have to turn Cap Metro into a competent and reliable mass transit partner, so we have better service and better services available. We could also add video surveillance in the areas that are a problem, and I think that covers it.
Thank you, Mr. Orshalik. Thank you all.
This next one is about historic preservation. What do you all think is the appropriate role for historic preservation in the city? And I believe forward to Mr. Phelps.
Well, one of the main goals as mayor for me, as a person that grew up here, is to protect the soul of Austin and what's sacred, and that's its people. And in addition to that, it's our buildings and that reflect our history. And I think as downtown moves forward, the Bass development in Fort Worth is a good example of protecting some historic buildings. You know, I don't understand exactly why City Hall's where Liberty Lunch used to be, but I wasn't making that decision. And so I think that the preservation of buildings needs to be paramount, and it hasn't been addressed properly so far, and we've lost a little bit of our uniqueness in the process. And I want to make sure that if there are developments, that we can keep as much of the original integrity of Austin as we possibly can.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
I think historic preservation is critical to our community. We must try to preserve as much as we can of our culture and heritage, quite frankly, that made Austin the special place that it is. I think where it becomes a concern is when you start giving tax breaks for that preservation. And so that really, I think, is at the heart of the issue of whether you support historic preservation. I led the effort to reduce the tax relief that comes with a historic designation, to place a cap on it. I realize that there is a burden to upkeeping a historic home and that you do restrict yourselves from expanding that home in certain manners. So there is a cost that comes with it. But I think waiving 100% of all property taxes simply because we believe that you have a historic structure that needs preserving is where the heart of this issue is, and we've led the effort to cap that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stevens.
I certainly agree with the effort to cap historic preservation tax breaks when you have multi-million-dollar homes being preserved through those tax breaks at the expense of other taxpayers.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Ms. Cole.
It's important that we maintain the character and integrity of our neighborhoods through historic preservation. Earlier, we had a question that talked about the African American population leaving the city and not growing as fast as the rest of the population. I think it's really important that we have the African American Heritage District and different other districts to preserve the integrity of those historical structures. At the same time, there are limits to what we can do to actually maintain a solid tax base, and I've always supported that.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Orshalik.
Yes, I believe that historic structures are cultural icons of a city, and they help create the culture and uniqueness of a city. So I favor protecting the unique character of Austin through historic preservation. I also feel that tax breaks for historic designation have been abused, and that's why I favor a sunset review of all historic designations as far as tax credits go every 5 years.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler.
You know, I truly do believe that Austin is at a tipping point, and I think we're going to have to work really hard to hold on to and save and protect what it is that makes Austin special. There are certain things that are in this city that if we lose them, they're gone forever. And a lot of those are our iconic environmental features that we have in the city. It's open space and it's parks, and it's also historical structures. And I think it's important that the city hold on to those, again, because when they're gone, they don't come back. I think that incentives or the city's participation in those has to relate directly to the cost of those. But we need to be involved. There are cities that are doing things that we should be taking a look at to bring here as well. Denver has an urban conservancy, which is kind of like the Texas Nature Conservancy, but instead of preserving open space land, it's looking at the urbanscape in the city. And we need to bring those kind of programs to Austin.
Thank you, sir. Nathan?
Well, that's going to do it for this evening. This has been Ballot Boxing, the Mayoral Forum on KUT 90.5. Thank you to all 6 candidates, Todd Phelps, Mike Martinez, Randall Stevens, Cheryl Cole, David Orshalik, and Stephen Adler. Can we please give our candidates a round of applause?
Thank you.
Early voting begins on Monday. I want to thank my co-moderators, Shannon Wolfson with KXAN, Mike Kanan with the Austin Monitor. Thank you both. Thank you for listening to this on KUT 90.5. For our media partners at the Austin Monitor, the Austin Chronicle, KXAN, and Univision, I'm Nathan Bernier with KUT 90.5. Thanks.